Well, the Virginia Supreme Court have ruled, and it is done. The Virginia Supreme Court strikes down the Democrat-led referendum on mid-decade redistricting. According to various news reports, on last Friday, the state Supreme Court in the Commonwealth of Virginia found that the referendum, in which challenged all Republican districts and made a 10-1 Democratic-leaning district approved by a majority of voters in the Commonwealth of Virginia, is null and void. What does this mean for the overall projections of the midterm elections? What were the reactions in the Commonwealth of Virginia? And overall, what does this mean for the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as it applies in 2026 and beyond? It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric Claville, and you're joining us for our Virginia referendum series. The court has ruled. Once again, we want to thank you all for joining us, as you always do, on this Sunday morning as we broadcast from the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation, from none other than WNSB, Hot 91, the soul of VA. We've got a lot to delve into. The Supreme Court decision was released on Friday morning of last week, and it is a doozy, and it is sending shockwaves throughout the country, not just the Commonwealth. And we're going to delve into it and break it down. I've been reading the decision and looking at various reports and looking at reactions and doing my analysis myself. And we're going to go into it. But before I do so, I would like to simply take this moment to congratulate all of the over 600 graduates of the Norfolk State University that walked across the stage on this past weekend, on yesterday, on Saturday. Over 600 graduates done their tassels, and they are now official alums of the institution. Congratulations to all of you for your accomplishments, and know that you are well prepared to go out and do great things, because the Spartan Nation definitely prepares you to be the student scholar and the student leader, and now the world leader, world changer in your chosen field. So go out and be great, but understand you're still learning. Life never ends as a learner. We also like to thank our Attorney General, Jay Jones, for his phenomenal speech to the graduates. Definitely a legacy from not only his grandfather and his father and mother, but now he's carrying that legacy as well as the 49th Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia, the first African-American Attorney General of the Commonwealth as well, leading the Commonwealth and being the chief and legal counsel for the Commonwealth. So again, Jay, congratulations. And thank you again for your commencement speech. And listen, I simply cannot continue this show without wishing all of the mothers in the world a happy Mother's Day. This is your day. We should honor you all year, and hopefully those that are around you do. But I want to take a special moment to thank all the mothers for being simply all that you are: kind, caring, there when we need it, and picking up the pieces, and also picking up the slack in the homes when it needs to be. Those that are industrious in the home and outside the home. Happy Mother's Day to you. You deserve it. You deserve your flowers, and may God bless each and every one of you. And yes, a special happy Mother's Day to my mother, Margaret Claville, and my deceased mother, Betty Claville, and also my wife, Michelle Claville. Thank you, three women, and to all my sisters, Gerladen, Andre, June, Jeanette, Joni, Shakaya, and everyone. Congratulations and happy Mother's Day to Alice and Ann as well, my niece. Happy Mother's Day to all of you. So let's get into this decision. The Supreme Court has ruled here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. According to various news reports, WTKR and News 3, the Virginia Supreme Court strikes down the Democrat-led referendum on mid-decade redistricting. The measure had passed by a margin of 51.69% to 48.31% during a special referendum held on April 21st, according to unofficial results published on the Virginia Department of Elections website. With this, the Supreme Court basically effectively nullified the voters of more than 3 million residents last month. According to Supreme Court Justice Arthur Kelsey, quote, "We hold that the legislative process employed to advance this proposal violated Article 12, Section 1 of the Constitution of Virginia. This constitutional violation incurably taints the resulting referendum vote and nullifies its legal efficiency. The court found that the process, according to WTKR News 3, by which the referendum reached the ballot did not comply with constitutional requirements. Now, of course, this decision comes once again after it was passed by a margin of over 3%. 3 percentage points, looks like 1.8 percentage points in favor of the special referendum held on April 21st, where the Democrats currently hold a 6-5 advantage in Virginia's congressional delegation. But the new map proposed by state lawmakers would have given them a 10-1 advantage. Now, with this, we know that the proposed constitutional amendment that was backed by Democratic officials would have bypassed the state's bipartisan redistricting commission to allow use of congressional districts approved, the new congressional districts approved by state lawmakers in this year's upcoming election. You know, we're going to look at, again, review how we got here, but then we're going to look at its impact here in the Commonwealth. We're going to look at its impact in the mid-decade redistricting arms race, which is what we're calling it, in light of the Louisiana decision by the U.S. Supreme Court and the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court as relates to Texas in 2025 with the power to redistrict, what this means for the Voting Rights Act and what this means for the midterm elections and the presidential administration moving forward. Let me tell you, first of all, before we delve into all this, it's a lot. So we're going to do it. I'm going to give an overview today. But we're going to go back and break this down into series because it's very important that all of you understand what is happening. We are witnessing a major shift, an about-face of voting rights protections and representation of representatives in our government, not just on the federal level, but it's about to impact our state and local level as well. So from what we saw from 1965 to now, to 2025, it will be no more if the states have their way because the courts have given them the opportunity to do so. So let's start to break this down. First, I want to look at how we got here. Now, we do know that once again, the General Assembly passed a constitutional referendum, in order to change our maps. Now, our maps for congressional districts only for a temporary purpose up to 2030. With this would give the General Assembly the ability to bypass a 2021 redistricting commission that was voted on by the voters, which we voted on here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and only pause their powers for this particular upcoming midterm election and then another election in 2028, and then wait till 2030 for it to be changed to revert back. Now, this was in large part due to, well, not large part, but this was due to the President of the United States requesting Republican states, starting with Texas, to give him redraw their maps mid-decade to give him more Republican seats. This is well documented, and Texas obliged. They diluted 5 Democratic districts, including 2 congressional Black Caucus districts, one in Dallas and one in Houston, and made them Republican-leaning districts. Okay? Now, of course, this was done on a quote-unquote political partisan basis, so political gerrymandering. And the Supreme Court ruled that, you can actually do this mid-decade on a partisan basis in 2025 when it was challenged. So therefore, not only was Texas able to redraw their districts mid-decade, which is usually done at the end of a decade, 2020, 2030, 2040, and the like. After the U.S. Census, they were able to do it mid-decade, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, sure, you could do that. No problem whatsoever. Now, what ended up happening, several other Republican-led states followed. The state of Missouri diluted and eliminated effectively the Congressional Black Caucus District in that particular city, in that state, in a majority or heavy Black area or city in Missouri. Ohio did the same thing. And North Carolina did the same thing with one of the Congressional Black Caucus districts here in North Carolina, right below Norfolk, where Elizabeth City is located. So with that being the case, that means that now all of those states, the five that I named, Texas, the three that I named, Texas, North Carolina, Ohio, and then also Missouri, all bypassed the voters, and the Republican-led legislators redrew the maps themselves without asking the voters, and then from there, the governors of those states, which are Republicans, signed it, and voila, the Supreme Court said you can do it. So California answered in order to attempt to bring balance back. They did a proposition and drew a map to make 5 Republicans congressional districts Democratic leaning. They gave it to the voters. The voters of California said, we agree, and it became law. And therefore, it balanced out what Texas did. Virginia tried to answer and thought that they were doing the right thing in helping to balance out temporarily. The Democratic-led legislature, here the General Assembly, and the Democratic governor worked together in order to provide this opportunity, and they put it up to the voters. The voters voted on April 21st, and the voters agreed by over a 3% margin, out of the margin of error. Now, with that, a Tazewell County judge ruled that the redistricting push was illegal for several reasons. Circuit Court judge, it was challenged, Jack Hurley Jr. said lawmakers failed to follow their own rules for adding the redistricting amendment to a special session. Now, this is according to WTKR. What he said was that he ruled that their initial vote failed to occur before the public began casting ballots in last year's general election, and thus didn't count toward the two-step process. He also ruled, the Circuit Court judge, that the state failed to publish the amendment 3 months before the election as required by law. Now, this was an effort, according to WTKR Channel 3, being led by state Democrats in response, once again, to Republican-controlled states taking similar efforts after being asked by the president to do so. So, what ended up happening was, in several congressional districts, more specifically in Hampton Roads, where Norfolk is located, Virginia's 2nd congressional district, which encompasses Virginia Beach, Suffolk, and Franklin, part of Chesapeake, Accomack, Northampton, and Isle of Wight counties, would have been notably altered under this proposed map. Now, with that being the case, this was, of course, appealed to the state Supreme Court after the Circuit Court judge nullified it. After the Supreme Court judge paused the certification, and it was challenged. And on last Friday, under the opinion, it was a 4-3. There are 7 justices on the state Supreme Court here in Virginia that have 12-year terms, by the way. All right. And we'll talk about it, not now, but we'll talk about how Virginia state Supreme Court judges, or which every state can elect or appoint or choose their justices any way they like. But in this case, it was a 4-3 decision. In this case, it was written by the state Supreme Court justice, the majority opinion. It says, quote, in this case, the Commonwealth submitted a proposed constitutional amendment to Virginia voters in an unprecedented manner that violated the intervening election requirement in Article 12, Section 1 of the Constitution of Virginia. This violation irreparably undermines the integrity of the resulting referendum vote and renders it null and void. And for this reason, the congressional district maps issued by this court in 2021, pursuant to Article 2, Section 6A of the Constitution of Virginia, remains the governing maps for the upcoming 2026 congressional election. Affirmed. And that's the legal term that means this decision is upheld, right? So basically, what they believe is that not the first, there are two, the process in order to have a constitutional referendum is that it has to be voted on by proposed and voted on by the General Assembly. And then you must have an election between that. And then you have to also vote on it again by the General Assembly. And then you have to allow that referendum to be put up in a special referendum by the voters. Now, what they're saying is that the intervening election was not an intervening election by Article 12 Article 12, Section 1 of the Constitution. The reasoning behind this is a historical reasoning. It just goes back to James Madison and the actual, as a former constitutional law professor myself, I enjoyed reading the decision because, of course, it gives legal history. They use a lot of cases that have been decided, and they use it in a historical context and apply that to now. One thing about this particular decision, I believe that when it ignores what's happening in other states and what's happening currently. But that is, it was a very good decision to read from that perspective. And I encourage everyone to just take some time and read it. But what happened was Chief Justice Powell, with whom Justice Mann and Justice Fulton joined, dissented. That simply means when you dissent, that's a legal term that says you go against it. I don't agree with what the majority court says. It states that this court has long recognized that our Constitution is certain and fixed, and it gives various cases to reference. It also said it contains the permanent will of the people, and therefore its meaning can only be altered by the people. Notwithstanding this bedrock principle, Justice Powell writes, today the majority has broadened the meaning of the word election, as used in the Virginia Constitution, to include the early voting period. This is in direct conflict with how both Virginia and federal law define election. Under the facts of this case, I believe the circuit court erred, and I respectfully disagree with the majority's conclusion that the General Assembly did not strictly comply with Virginia's constitutional requirements. For this reason, I must respectfully dissent. Now, of course, also it says, according to the majority, the General Assembly violated the intervening election requirement in Article 12, Section 1 of the Virginia Constitution by passing a proposed constitutional amendment for the first time after early voters had begun casting their ballots in the 2025 general election. And although Article 4, Section 3 mandates that delegates shall be elected the Tuesday succeeding the first Monday in November, the majority takes the position that there is material variation between shall be elected and the general election as described in Article 12, Section 1. It also reasons that unlike the single day on which a delegate is elected, a general election is not a fixed day. Instead, they conclude that an election is a cumulative process, encompassing the combined actions of voters casting ballots, officers receiving those votes, that begins on the first day of early voting, ends on election day. By focusing on the legislative history, dictionary definitions, and how legal scholars might interpret the term election, the majority fails to apply the most basic tenet of interpretation of constitutional provisions, looking to the language of the Constitution itself. So this particular, again, it was very interesting decision to read. And again, I encourage especially all the attorneys, all the professors to read it, and break it down, because this is something that this is a major decision, just like the U.S. Supreme Court decision. But what this in effect does, it basically broadens the term of an election, and the majority included early voting period. That's basically what it is. So therefore, this case, the votes of over 3 million people, with over 3.18% of those that voted in favor of the referendum, becomes null and void, because the court ruled that an election now includes early voting period and getting the ballots and counting them. And they believe that based on that interpretation, their definition, then therefore the General Assembly erred and did not adhere to Article 12, Section 1 of the Virginia Constitution, which gives strict requirements on how to change a constitutional constitution referendum, or change the Constitution itself through a referendum process that is thoughtful, that takes time, in their statement may be laborious. However, it is that way because changing the Constitution should be, which I do agree. However, when you take a look at the decision, this came down to what is an election or not. Again, major decision that is now altering what we were going to see moving forward as it relates to what we see now in the United States that's taking place. So what does this mean, right, for the Commonwealth? Then number one, it means that all that voted for the decision, it becomes null and void. And now you're going to end up voting, from a practical matter, for the same congressional districts that you were voting for before. Now, let's look at some reactions. According to WGKR, of course, politicians, figures around the U.S. started reacting to this decision when the Supreme Court of Virginia struck down the map by the Democrats. Let's first start with our governor. Governor Abigail Spanberger said, more than 3 million Virginians cast their ballots in Virginia's redistricting referendum. And the majority of Virginia voters voted to push back against the president, who said he is entitled to more Republican seats in Congress. With a temporary and responsive referendum, they made their voices heard. She goes on to state that I am disappointed by the Supreme Court of Virginia's ruling, but my focus as governor will be on ensuring that all voters have the information necessary to make their voices heard this November in the midterm elections, because in those elections, we, the voters, will have the final say. All right, so that's our governor. She's disappointed, but now it's time to turn to November. The court has spoken. Let's look what President Donald Trump, our president, said. He said on Truth Social, huge win for the Republican Party and America in Virginia. The Virginia Supreme Court has struck down the Democrats' horrible gerrymander. In all caps, make America great again. President Donald J. Trump. Let's take a look at what our junior senator, Senator Tim Kaine, said. He said, unlike Republican-led states that have redrawn their maps through backroom deals, again, I mentioned the Republicans bypassed the people and they drew them themselves. The Virginia General Assembly let the people decide for themselves in a free and fair election. If the Virginia Supreme Court had legitimate concerns about this referendum, the time to stop it would have been before 3 million Virginians cast their ballots. And the actual case, the decision by the Supreme Court addressed that. You know, they gave a reasoning for it, but many people believe that, hey, you had the referendum in front of you, so, you should have stopped it then. But Senator Kaine goes on to say, he said, but the court let the process move forward. The Virginians sent a message loud and clear. We see President Trump's brazen power grab in states across the country, and we won't stand for it. He goes on to say that the timing of this ruling speaks volumes, and the U.S. Supreme Court eviscerates the Voting Rights Act in a lawsuit brought by January 6 extremists, and southern states race to craft backroom deals disenfranchising minority voters and candidates. Meanwhile, Virginia voters choose to stand up against national disenfranchisement only to see their votes cast into the trash by a 4-3 ruling. A sad day indeed, but I'm proud of Virginians' willingness to stay true to our state's motto. After 250 years, the spirit is needed, but now more than ever. So that's our junior senator, Senator Tim Kaine, who's the former governor. Let's look at our senior senator, U.S. Senator Mark Warner. He said, while I respect the Virginia Supreme Court's decision, it's impossible to ignore that more than 3 million Virginians already cast their ballots on the amendment and deserve to have their voices heard. Senator Warner goes on to say, he said, let's be clear. This started because Republicans across the country decided to push mid-decade redistricting in states where they thought they could rig the map for partisan gain, which they did. Virginia's effort was a response to that national power grab, not the cause of it. Senator Warner goes on to say Donald Trump assumed he could tilt the playing field and lock in political advantage before a single ballot was cast. But Virginians are paying attention. They want leaders who will protect their rights, defend their freedoms, and actually focus on lowering costs and getting things done. He goes on to say that Democrats will show up this November. We will still compete everywhere, and when the votes are counted, Virginians will send a strong message about the kind of leadership that we want. There is also a statement from Congresswoman Jen Kiggins. Again, Congressional District 2 here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The seat of it is Virginia Beach, and it is a purple district. And in the United States of America, out of 435 seats in Congress, it is the number one competitive seat in Congress. It flips just about every 2 election cycles. She says the Supreme Court of Virginia's ruling is a victory for Virginians' right to fair and adequate representation against the Democrats' attempt to unfairly grab power through an unconstitutional gerrymander of Virginia. Violating the Virginia Constitution and bypassing rule of law to further one's political power is wrong. Had Abigail Spanberger and the rest of Virginia Democrats succeeded, they would have caused irreparable harm to our democracy and disenfranchised millions of Virginians. I thank the Supreme Court for its courage in standing up for what is right. The Speaker, now she will continue to run in that same district in Virginia Beach against former Congresswoman Elaine Luria, who she beat a couple of cycles ago, but she's back challenging her. So, again, look for that district to be extremely competitive. Virginia House Speaker Don Scott, and one of the leaders of the effort, he said, "We respect the decision of the Supreme Court of Virginia. I'm proud that Virginians came out in historic numbers, made their voices heard, sent a message, not just here at home, but across the country to Donald Trump and his administration." The Speaker goes on to say that 3 million people voted in a free and fair election. "We gave this decision to the voters exactly where it belongs, and they spoke loud and clear." He says they voted yes, all caps, because they wanted to fight back against the Trump power grab. That truth doesn't change because of a court ruling. This was always about more than one election. It was about whether the voice of the people matter, and no decision can erase what Virginians made clear at the ballot box. He says, goes on to say, "We respect the court. We will keep fighting for democracy where voters, not politicians, have the final say, because in Virginia, power still belongs to the people." Of course, we also have statements by Majority Leader Scott Surville, and also a statement by the House Speaker for Congress, Speaker Mike Johnson. I'm going to read his statement, and there are many, many others, but I want to read the head of the Republican Party. He says, "The Virginia Supreme Court has affirmed what we believe from the beginning. The hastily drawn, egregious gerrymander was unconstitutional. This ruling is a victory for democracy and ensures Virginians have fair representation in Congress." Now, all of these statements, this was a hard-fought battle, and it came down to a court ruling. Very similar to the Louisiana versus Calais case, came down to a court ruling that said you can no longer use race as a factor in joint congressional districts. So therefore, very hastily, the state of Louisiana, the state of Alabama, the state of Tennessee, the state of South Carolina, within a 72-hour period, all called special sessions to eliminate and chop up majority-minority districts, the very thing that the Voting Rights Act was chosen to do, and make them Republican-leaning. So, 10 Republican states right now, through the legislative bodies only, the majority Republicans in majority Republican legislators in majority in Republican states with Republican governors rejoined their maps or have done so, and are going to present these maps and eliminate majority minority districts. So when you talk about representation, when you talk about your voice matters, it definitely matters. But once again, this is a fast-moving case. We will continue to follow this and break it down for you moving into the summer of the primaries so that you can be well-informed and make a more well-informed decision. As always, we want to thank you for joining here on State of Water, where we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you and timely issues to discuss them that are important to you and the community. Until next time, be good, be great. God bless. Happy Mother's Day. Happy congratulations to the graduates. And we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.